Welcome back to another episode of Ignorance is Infinite. Where father and daughter discuss generational topics about the accumulation of Black and minority wealth. I'm getting there late, you're getting there early.
Yep. And today we're going to hit on the topic of education and kind of what doors it opens for you and if it even matters to a certain degree.
Ooh. This segment is brought to you by secretsbetweenfriends.com. Buy it again for the very first time. Go to www.secretbetweenfriends.com and make a purchase. So, the role of education. Overall, education can be seen as a general consensus as the development of your way of thinking. That's just like a roundabout thing. So in preparation, we've had a couple of discussions. We started doing our little research and videos and pulling out stats and whatnot. And I came across a video of President Obama talking about education and the role of it. And I thought it was good. So there was a couple of things that he went on, and I'll read a line to you. You give me a little feedback of what you think. I already believe and like what he was saying. So one, learning how to learn, thinking critically, and finding solutions to unexpected problems. That's why you start to get an education. Learning how to learn.
Yes, I believe in that. I'll subscribe to that. I was talking to you the other day about how we were talking both about when you go to college, you have to get through the minutia of the core curriculum. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is like, I'm not going to remember this tomorrow, let alone after I graduate, but you have to go through that for an underlying reason that they don't tell you.
Funny you should say that. It's almost like he addressed it. You may not use algebra, but you learn to think through tougher problems. It's like forcing you. I may not need it, but these tough problems, they teach it to you. Like you said, it may evaporate. But sometimes you do remember some of the stuff that you learned. Is there anything hard that you learned that you didn't think was useful that you found useful?
No.
His third thing was teaches you the value of discipline, one of my favorite words, and sustained efforts. So a lot of people know how to do something, but can they continually do it and go back to it? Discipline. What do you think about that?
It's an outlet where you can work on growing your discipline, but it's not the only outlet that you need or you could use.
But I don't mean discipline as, a math or science, something that you're doing. Discipline on controlling yourself.
And also, it's important to say that you could go to school and not get that message or learn that. There are plenty of people with college degrees that lack that too.
Right, and you focus on college degrees. I'm talking grades 1 through post-secondary school. But one of my favorite movie lines was from Heat, when Neo says, he's talking to the cop, they're sitting across from each other, and he's like, never have any ties to anything as being a bank robber or a thief. Mm-hmm. And if you feel the heat coming around the corner, don't be afraid to walk away from anything in 30 seconds. Like, just drop everything and leave. And he's like, oh, and if you had a lady, you just walk out on her? He's like, that's the discipline. Like, just that focus is crazy. It's a little maniacal, but just the idea of discipline, to me, it kind of encapsulated it. Mm-hmm. Fourth thing he said, you can learn to be a better human being, whether it's your parents teaching you that at home or teachers trying to teach you that at school, being a better human being. Do you feel education helps with that?
No.
That's hilarious.
That is a straight no.
Does it help you to be a better human being that you have to socialize? That's interesting. You have siblings. There's things that you probably had arguments with your brother, and your mother stepped in and said you shouldn't do that and explain why. That's education. Education is not just...
No. I mean, I feel like the way you're painting the picture, anyone who gets any sort of degree is like Mother Teresa. They're about to get the Nobel Peace Prize. They're so disciplined. They're so...
all right, what about people, and I don't know how many people you've come across without an education, that you can see they act a certain way?
I feel like I come across more people with an education that act a certain way, that don't act. respectful of different cultures and different ideas when they're supposed to because of an education, but they don't. I mean, Fordham would have problems all the time of people writing racial slurs on walls. Like, just because you have an education by no means means that you become a better person.
Well, again, it didn't say it makes you a better person. It said it helps you. If it helps you, it's contributing.
It could help you.
Maybe I should talk like Obama.
But here's the thing, and I think we've talked about this in other conversations as well, when you can be given an opportunity that can help you do a lot of things, but it's what you do with that opportunity. Definitely. You can waste that opportunity and it not do what it's supposed to do.
And sometimes opportunities are never fully lost. Fifth thing he said, it helps you to imagine walking in someone else's shoes. So again, education, they always have to bring up different examples. They have to keep you intrigued and try to keep you interested. And usually they do it through a historical perspective or they give their own personal accounts of something. So seeing it as other people's, that it's not just your bubble. So education helps with that.
In some ways, yes. But that makes me think of our other episode when we talked about kind of how sometimes the people in charge rewrite history. Like you could read a textbook and be taught one thing and the truth is a completely different story.
And that's where, to me, curiosity keeps you pushing. So we know there's no federal standard for education. It's each state, and then within each state, they have boards of education within each municipality. So a lot of people do learn some different things and some nuances, and some things get left out. And it's crazy like that we don't have at least some basic federal guidelines. And the last thing you talked about was the success of our economy depends on your skills, things that you're learning. The success of our communities depends on the golden rule of you always learned, treat people as you would like to be treated. That's something that has to be continually drilled into you. You just don't learn that on your own.
No.
Sometimes you have to see examples.
It takes a village to make any human being.
And what would you say was part of your village? Who are the components of your village? That's interesting that you brought that up.
Friends, family, teachers, co-workers, bosses, neighbors, anyone.
I'm saying literally who was some, I don't say names, a next door neighbor, a class in high school, middle school. Where did you feel the most impact outside of your home that had an influence on you? Stump the Swami.
Yeah, stump. Sports. I feel like I did a lot of development in school sports. It's not like I did sports anywhere else, but.
Did you feel like that at the time? Or did you feel like it was just this exercise, this physical exertion exercise?
Well, no, you learn some sense of playing nice with others. Being a positive person.
Begrudgingly. So that's good. That's a good way that we kick this off. The next area I like to talk about are options. And part of why I talk about education so much is that, you know, I grew up socially, economically poor and had to fight my way out. And I had 3 other brothers. So we all had varying levels of how far we went with it. And there's always statistics out there. So some of the things where they talk about education matters, you know, they start to try to pose things versus, well, if you have a doctorate or a doctor's degree, master's, a regular BA, college degree, high school diploma, GED, no GED. And they try to let you know kind of where the average is. And some interesting numbers in terms of weekly earnings, you know, if you had a doctor's degree, average weekly, and I don't know if it's before tax or after tax, I assume let's just say it's after taxes. Mm-hmm. Doctors make $1,600 a week. That's their net.
Really?
You double that up, you know, we usually get paid bi-weekly, $3,500. That's bare minimum. A professional degree, $1,700. A master's degree, $1,300. A bachelor's degree, $1,100. Associate's degree, $798. So there's a big drop off from bachelor's to associate. Some college.
The top 2 were close.
Huh?
The top tiers were very close.
But the drop starts to be when you don't have that degree. And I usually say that's a demarcation. That's where somebody can start to say, all right, they got a degree, so they finished something. And they look at it as when you get an associate, well, you went to something 2 years that you're trying to find your way. Then you get to 4 year, and either you get it in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, but you get it. So you finish that accomplishment. So associate degree around 800. Some school, some college, 760. High school diploma drops down to 678, and less than a high school diploma is like 490. So you go from weekly 1700 to 490. And you can see if the same people live in the same geographic area, then they're living kind of different. They're trying to figure out how to make their money stretch. You always get that saying of living paycheck to paycheck and trying to get beyond that.
Well, so you can live paycheck to paycheck at any degree. If you know
because it depends on how you spend beyond your means.
That's a different episode.
But sometimes the value of the degree, if you don't lump on a lot of things, and we talked about this too in a production meeting, where if you get stuck with college loans, so say you go to college, or a lot of people are pushed to that, where they're not getting scholarships and the financial aid is not covering enough because they flipped out the idea of, well, just take out a loan and pay it off as if you were paying off a car loan or a house loan or credit cards. And now people get saddled with that debt. And even though they have that degree, that first job where you don't get top dollars in your first job, they expect you to show what you can do, assimilate into their culture. And if you show certain things, you ascend quicker than others, you start getting those raises. But a lot of times people can't survive at that base level and start looking for another job already.
Which that makes me think of, I was in a college class once, and my professor was, I think, from Finland or Scotland, Netherlands.
Right.
And in his country, education is free. Like all levels of education, you can go get your degree for free.
So we got to figure out which country that was, but go ahead.
And he was saying he came to America and he was like, this is crazy. You guys have to pay for your education? That's ridiculous. It's like our community and our government places a large, like a pat on the back if you get education, like you're doing good, but then it's restricted access. So education is almost like it is a privilege, and some people aren't afforded that.
Right. So in his country where it's free, they're saying it's a right.
Yeah.
Where here, once you get to a certain level, then it becomes a privilege. And now we're all in that rat race. Because you said something too in the production meeting where I was like, well, America's like 44 for something in the world and some topic. And you're like, it's not a competition. Well, within its own little bubbles, it always is. We always compete, even at your job, right? They do a ranking system where you don't mind hovering, I don't even know, at the middle, where I'd be like, I want to be above the middle, so I'm going to push and learn what I got to do. So we approach it differently.
I feel like that statistic reflects more on the government than the citizens. You can't complain that your people are falling behind in education and then you're not doing much to help them. I think we're the top people in weapons. Why can't we be the top people in education?
Well, it's easier to manufacture weapons and give money than to get people to learn and grow and have that incentive. You need an incentive to go to school. You say, why am I doing this? To get, to earn a way of living. That's how I look at it. It's not just to get a job and a paycheck. It's to earn a way of living. People are like, if you're doing something that you love, you're not really working. That's so hard to achieve.
Even within education, that's hard to achieve.
But it's hard to achieve doing something you love and having enough money to live a life of some basic comforts, not living paycheck to paycheck.
That's an assumption.
What? Go ahead. Why is it an assumption?
There's tons of people doing what they love who aren't living paycheck to paycheck. You can't say in absolute, as you say, like that.
Oh, absolute never stuff. That. Yeah. Of course I can't say nothing in absolute because nothing is absolute.
The arts.
Except death, right? Death, we don't think anybody's come back.
Construction. Right? Then you start talking about trades.
Uh-huh.
So there's options out there. I feel like this is where we got, in our pre-production meeting, we got a bit, our wires were crossed. And you were thinking I was saying education is almost like it doesn't matter, which I don't think that at all. Education opens doors, but that's not to say there are doors that don't exist prior to education. If you don't want an education, you're still gonna have some doors.
So the person without the education has two doors. The person with an education, and depending on level, you can say each level adds two more doors. And again, that's an opinion of how many doors there would be. But you agree there would be more doors?
Of course.
And more options. So
every job listing you come across has some semblance of requirements. So there are things you can't even get your foot in the door without a certain level of degree.
Right. Then you get to a point where you may want to fill a position, you need to take the best person available, or you're not even looking for a position, but all of a sudden you come across talent and people that you're like, oh my God, this person is available. How can I get them in? Because I want to better what it is that we're doing and how we're doing and grow it and exceed expectations. So there's a lot of different factors that play into it.
Of course.
So the third area kind of was talking about some of the facts about education in America. I had passed you a couple of articles that I came across and seemed to be going a little bit at it in pre-production, because one of the articles just had all these little cute pictures and phrases of what they were saying, and you were saying how, well, they weren't backing it up with data. And then the second article had a couple of points, like 11 points, and then another 11 points saying exactly where they pulled this information from. But some interesting things, right?
And where is this from, by the way? So you can let everyone know.
Well, it was from the website dosomething.org, and then each point is based on some information.
Statistics.
That different people pulled up, different studies, and if somebody was interested in that, they can go in the comments and we can delve into that further. So one of the things they talked about, our nation's education assessment is largely based on graduation rates, and they're going back to 2012, and in this case, they were talking about Black students had only 69% graduation rate, Hispanic students 73% graduation rate, Asians 88%, and Caucasians 86%.
Graduation from what? Just in general, cumulatively, or did they say?
High school. Or they don't really no, high school. Yep. So that big gap, right? I know there's these stereotypes that, especially in this culture, you gotta be careful saying it, but I know coming up, when I was choosing a high school, I tried to get into one of the three best high schools. They had something called the Bronx High School of Science, Stuyvesant, and Brooklyn Tech. Those were schools that you had to take a test to get into. Otherwise, you had to go to the high school in your local region.
Why?
Why what?
At that young age, why was that a priority?
Because everybody knows that the public school that you usually have to go to doesn't have the best resources. And since every student is going there, there's no measurement to say, how can I get somebody who's showing some promise a better education? They're sitting in a room with other people that may not be on their level, and they're not getting enough. It's almost like young Sheldon. He's always in a classroom where he thinks everybody else is like, oh my God, you guys are still learning this? And this is a kid, and these guys are like 5 or 10 years older, but they need to learn that stuff at that pace. So you wanted that opportunity. So I said I was good at math. I was a little bit ahead, so I took the algebra regions, geometry regions. So I tried to get into one of those schools, but even though I was a little bit good in math, I wasn't good enough overall to crack. It's not a lottery. There's a cutoff, 300 students. They don't tell you where you fall out of that 300 students, but I didn't make it. I had to go to my local high school. And eventually, I told you I came out. I was number 10 of a graduating class of 383. So while I didn't achieve a certain level there, I was able to pin my hat on something and pull from it so that it became something of that carrot that I kept chasing and pushing.
But that desire at a young age for a more prestigious education is interesting. It's not like that's natural. That makes me think
it's very natural.
No, because that makes me think of when I was at Ursuline, which is like one of the best all-girls Catholic high schools in Westchester County. And sophomore year, I think I told Mom I wanted to go to Yonkers High.
Saunders, I think.
I wanted to go to a public high school. just for the experience. Like
right. It's like the train had left the station already. That's not happening. You can't go backwards. And yeah, it might have done good, and maybe they should do something like that, semester exchange program. I think I've seen that in movies before, and it may exist. But a lot of times, once you get to a certain level, it's usually in places where the opportunity on the other side. So the local high school is in a smaller town, and they really would, it would be helpful for them to see and to be exposed to some other things that they do those exchanges. But a lot of times it's to bring the person that's in that special privilege school kind of down a notch so they can feel more empathy of other people. Or like Obama was saying, walk in other people's shoes so that you don't become an elitist thinking, looking down on other people because their situation was the same as yours.
Did your mom put an emphasis on education while you were in your younger years? Is that where that came from? You seeking out a better school? Because not everyone has parents that even enforce education. So did you have that? And that's what sparked
let's see.
The interest?
I think I had perfect attendance, like for the first, through kindergarten through like grade 6. And used to get these awards. So I got still a stack in my mother's house of all these awards. So there was some pride there. Now my older brother didn't get those type of awards, didn't aspire to school. So her showing that interest and showing her pride and beaming and wanting to frame stuff of just perfect attendance awards showed that she appreciated that, and she wanted that I get that good feeling from her, that I would keep striving for it. Now, my older brother was already train left the horses out the barn type thing. So it was like, all right, now I got this chance to work on this one. And then I got 2 little brothers, and the next one after me didn't aspire that way either. So in terms of education, every time I went to the next level or ended the first and only out of us 4 to graduate college, there was a certain sense of beaming pride that she was seeing that, and she appreciated that. And then she ended up working in education, trying to help with people in disadvantaged programs where they wouldn't go to school and they wouldn't be there for attendance because they were living in situations like, homes or shelters. And she would go to those shelters to try to find those kids to help to see how can we get them into school. So it was always important to her, and it always became important to me. But since my surroundings were so less than desirable, I just knew education would set me free.
Well, I think that brings up an important crux of the issue between how you value education. Okay. I think you are looking at it as my parents are viewing education as an accomplished, like something that I'm being praised for. Then you have people on the opposite end that it's not even talked about. Like maybe their parents aren't even involved, or on the more extreme end of, oh, we don't talk about education, kids can skip school and it's fine. And then there's the other scenario for me where I didn't feel like education was a sense of pride. It was just an expectation. Like, it's like, you just got to do that. Not a good job as a school.
Right, but then you have parents that were also pushing education and going and getting more education. So we knew the value of it, and that you guys had to be armed. Your mother didn't want you going to, we were going to pay for whatever we had to pay, whatever we could afford. We were in a position with full-time jobs and everything, and already having a house and not being caught up in that race where rents were getting exorbitant. I mean, people live in studio apartments. I pay less than them in a mortgage. That's crazy. So we had that opportunity to push. And that's why I love these conversations that we're having and trying to put out there so that others can see it and at least maybe plant a seed that, yeah, it's not impossible. Sometimes you have to go seek out information that's not always readily available or is being hidden from you. So it wasn't that it was a reward system for education, but at the same time, it's a meritocracy, meaning how well you do, it shows, it's evident. So they let you know. What happens every time you took a test in school? Everybody was giving their test back with their grade on it. I don't know if they did that in Ursuline and they didn't put scores, but back in the day, 95s, 80s, whatever, A, B, C, D. Everybody saw each other's thing. And it's like, ooh, little Billy. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be that person.
I feel like you learn those values in your youth, now that I'm starting to see. Because once I got to college, I was more of a C's get degrees.
You were more what?
More of a C's get degrees mentality. Like, as long as I pass this, it's fine. I'm gonna get my degree. As opposed to you, even if you're gonna get your degree, you wanna be at the top, which is a different mentality. And I feel like you learn all of those things in your youth. You learn everything in your youth. You're taught to think how you do. So you're either taught to not value it at all, or it becomes like this spectrum of what you think of education.
It's either or, and usually the example that's set before you, you see it. Most of the situations where a student is not pushed or a child's not pushed, is you'll see one parent is just in whatever job they're in, and it's kind of a rut. It's like they're fine with it. And you just go get what you get, and you'll be fine too if you end up like me. Or there's some that push it because there's a need, because they want to make sure, maybe other family members. There's so many factors. But it's the ones that they don't care, that it's usually a counselor in school or another parent of a friend that kind of tries to help out without stepping on somebody's toes, because that could be a problem sometimes where parents are like, why are you trying to do this with my kid? And it's like you're just trying to nurture their minds so they don't end up as in places that you don't want them to end up, beyond their control. Options is really talking about control. There's certain things you can't control what job you have unless you're like this superstar. But at the same time, you want to avoid being labeled or end up in prison or something like that, of that nature, where you can't get out of that rut, or you're stuck in something and you have fewer and fewer options. The options are almost the same.
Do you think education gives a semblance of control?
Definitely. Because, again, they're teaching you something, they're giving you a test, and they're saying, here, show me what you can do. You control your effort. You control your effort. And the outcome of again, it's something that it's usually not subjective when it comes to test scoring, except in something where it's reading comprehension. The other stuff is, there's a right and wrong. Okay.
I mean, outside of school, once you get to the job market, I feel like you still have no control.
Well, the job has a structure. You work for somebody else in their system that helps generate their money. So they say, this is how we do it. We need you to do it this way. And then, you have some wiggle room. But until you become so good at something that you can own your own business and create your own rules, then you have all the control. And even then, you're at the mercy of people showing up to work. You need to build something, a culture where you just feel it mitigates as much risk as possible, and you feel you have the most control because you show people how you're helping them and you're paying them a good wage, and it doesn't feel like you're taking advantage of them. In a lot of jobs, it feels like they're taking advantage of you, especially in the jobs that are going up now, retail, food, services, and what have you. They're just doing it so they can hit their numbers. If they need you, they'll use you. They don't need you, they'll cut you loose easy. And you don't want to be in a position where they can cut you loose easy. You work in a job where it's a union, where it's not the typical, you work in a writing. Unions used to be for those disciplines like plumbing and electricians, and they made sure that they got a certain wage because of a certain skill set, where writing is a little more subjective. So having a union is like a double bonus, because it's what you do and write, and it's saying you have certain protections that other people don't have. Do you feel you have some control? And again, you're early in your jobs, so you're 2 years there.
Almost.
So it's like your first real full-time job, and you're learning. And either you'll grow with that company and say, I want to be here, I want to excel to all the levels, and hey, can I one day have part ownership? Or at some point, you'll be doing some stuff and you'll outgrow it, and you're like, I need this, or this opportunity comes up, or something you didn't even think about because you don't know it yet. That's the beauty of ignorance sometimes. You don't even know it yet. But once it comes, if you're ready for it, you're going to jump at it. So I always find that interesting.
Yeah, I will say that my door opened to my job because I got my degree. And because of the specific education that I got internships at big news organizations. And I didn't even have to apply for my job. I got recruited. So it did open doors.
So it's perfect that we can segue to this fourth point about some of the reasons why it's so hard to find a job in this after getting a degree. So we got a lot of people that have that degree, have all that debt, and they still have a problem trying to find a job. You know, across the world, there's so many people. Like when you think of, there's thousands of college in our 50 states. So that's a lot of people. And every time May starts to roll around, they say, who's going to be the speaker at graduation? Did you get the most famous person, a writer, a star, an astrophysicist, or what have you? Mm-hmm. You look into the crowd, all those faces ready to go to the job market. It's crazy. That's a lot of people going in all the time. Do you ever think, well, there's a job market, there's jobs available, but is it enough to feed that much supply? That's interesting. No. And then on the flip side, are enough people retiring? Are they reaching that age? Or do they have to hold on because things are so expensive and they're staying in the market and not creating those opportunities for those young people to come in?
I think that's a problem that's starting to come up too, is now, before it was all get your bachelor's degree and you're almost guaranteed a job. That makes you so valuable. And now tons of people with bachelor's degrees don't have a job, and they're starting to say, no, everyone has it now, so you need to start leveling up. You need to get a master's degree, and then you'll stand out, because there isn't enough jobs.
And I felt some of that was, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, the businesses started learning, you know, how to increase their profitability, especially if they were traded publicly. They always had to keep inching up. And they were like, how can we cut costs? Well, you can cut costs by having fewer people, or you reduce the cost that it costs to make something. And how did they do that? They moved a lot of jobs overseas. It was cheaper to have it exported back to us than to have a lot of people with good paying wages, pensions, and all that stuff that stood on the books for a long time, as opposed to just getting it created at a cheaper price, sending it over, selling it, and repeating. So it created fewer jobs and fewer opportunities. It's not like we take this group of college graduates and say, oh, there's some jobs in America, but hey, follow the jobs overseas. Mm-hmm. There's challenges there. But some of the reasons are high competition, little work experience. You don't usually get an internship if you're not in a school.
No.
Right. It's a program that's usually based on you being like a junior and a senior starting to inch toward the job market, and they're seeing, well, you're getting some experience, and then if you turn out to be pretty good, hey, we're going to offer you a job. So there's that relationship there. Fewer no skills, little networking. Again, unless you're around people or you're going to things that are what your interests are, those trades and meeting people, because this business, any business is about meeting people and building relationships.
But it's important to point out that varies from school to school. Like we can't just put a blanket statement and say, get a bachelor's degree, you're going to pop into an internship and land a job. Then you start going into the kid at the fancier school is going to get way more opportunities than if you go to a community college or a state school, even though they're the same equivalent.
Exactly. So what happens? That group moves together into the market, and the first place they look are going to be the better schools. Why? They're producing something that is almost a guarantee of, and it's not really a guarantee, but at least that if you made it, you've passed some stringent requirements to get to that point. There's some reliability to it.
They're all equivalent. You can get an applicant from a SUNY school or a CUNY. Like for those not in New York, those are public colleges in New York.
State level and the city level. Mm-hmm.
And then they could be the exact same level of adequacy for a job as somebody who graduated from a more well-known private school.
But it may be at a skill set level where the job requires some other stuff, some socializing. And again, you're gonna learn this stuff as you go along. They used to have so many business meetings on the golf course. So if you would get to a certain level, you need to be able to play golf. Just so you have those backroom conversations. They're not in a back room, they're on a golf course. but not enough people will learn how to play golf. That filters down to whatever it is that they're using for that way to break down the social walls and say, this is where I'm comfortable having these conversations. But that, yeah, there's another area for that to talk about that.
Which I have noticed a lot of news organizations in particular are starting to now do specialized internships for state and community colleges, making that effort to reach down to those other schools.
But how long before somebody's suing them from one of the private schools going like, hey, you're leaving me out? That's the society we live in now. It's crazy. And that's the thing. What would drive somebody to say you're leaving me out becomes the quality of the jobs that are out there. So I know you was just looking up some stuff. I looked up these things about the job numbers. Like it was talking about who's hiring in America as of March 5th, 2021. And it was saying there is an increase in jobs, but when you start to drill down, it was saying the increases were food services, accommodation and food services, leisure and hospitality, apparel manufacturing, and amusement and gambling. Those were the jobs that are going up. Those jobs average $16 an hour. Where the jobs were going down, they were losing jobs, oil and gas extraction, heavy and civil engineering construction, air transportation, clothing accessory stores, and support activities for mining. The average wages there, $35 an hour. Mm-hmm. So we're gaining jobs where you have your pick of who you can hire because it's $16 an hour. And a lot of people won't go for that unless they're desperate. Where the jobs that we're losing still, even though the job numbers totally are up, but the quality of the jobs, the ones that we're losing that pay a higher wage, that's where the problem lies sometimes too. That you have to have the education and be able to understand, well, a job's not just a job. All jobs are not equal. And it takes certain things to get to different levels of jobs and different types of jobs. And you need
it's also important to note you have the outliers then.
Mm-hmm.
You have the electricians, the plumbers, the construction workers. They're still making oftentimes more than decent incomes without formal.
So it's funny, right? So it's almost like I have some inside information. So I work for a consulting firm where we're trying to get more minorities and women into that business. Again, the old unions of those trades are still something you have to struggle to get into. Mm-hmm. Unless you're like super skilled. To get the percentages up, it's almost protectionalism. So there's something called union jobs and open shop. Mm-hmm. Open shop means that it's not union, it's whatever rate. And we have to review payrolls for whatever reason to quantify something or qualify something. And I'll see union payrolls that have a plumber making $50 an hour, his wage, and then another $50 an hour supplemental benefits that go to his union. Mm-hmm. That pay toward a whole bunch of things, vacation, pensions, and all that stuff. So he's literally making $100 an hour. Then I see on an open shop job, the same job, it'll list a plumber and say he's making $22 an hour. It's mm-hmm. like, because in an open shop job, you're just happy to be on that job and looking for that opportunity to keep building up your skills, get a paycheck, and then look for a better opportunity. In that situation, you're always looking for a better opportunity. So you brought it up where plumbing and construction, they get better wages, but within that, there's opportunity and a lot more where the people that are building these buildings want to go for the open shop because they can control their costs. Mm-hmm. It's weird out there.
Well, that's a lot of jobs. I'm afraid I'll get replaced by a robot. Everybody's boss is trying to control their leading funds.
Right, because everybody has a budget. And it all depends on what drives that budget.
Yeah, but the pay gaps will affect all industries. That's another episode.
Right, but it's like you got to know your worth.
Genders as well.
Mm-hmm. You got to know your worth. It's a constant struggle. And I only seen it, again, I don't know how they put together a budget in a journalistic endeavor, but in a retail endeavor, they're like, all right, we want to spend 10% on labor force. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Again, as a regional, I saw the gamut where some stores were stuck with a 10% labor rate and others were at like 25. And the difference was the specialty or the size of the store. It depended on what it needed to do to operate. And since they had years of data, they knew where they can play with it a little bit up and down. And then if it was a good year, they'd expand it because it's going to flow to the bottom line. But in a bad year, again, your big expense is always your labor. So you make fewer people do more. That's any industry. But in these retail and food services, that's the norm.
I also remember you saying that, like, once you got into your job when you were being a regional manager, you're looking at what the people below you are making, and then the way up high execs are getting huge bonuses. Like, there's even like this big line of demarcation once you get into like the big leagues of, okay, these are like the lower degree workers, and then these are the top dogs taking most of the money and giving the rest the 10%.
So again, to get managers to drive others, you'd have managers. When I first got back into the bookstore business in 2007, it was like managers would get a bonus, assistant managers, the textbook department manager, the general merchandise manager. As things struggled and got harder and harder to make money in the book business, everybody below a store manager lost that. And then they would reduce the amounts every year. You could make up. It was like if you had a great year, you could make
maybe
up 15%.
Maybe for that level, but not for the top, right?
For everybody.
Top's not getting a reduction.
For everybody. Because, again, even at the top, they're part of a budget. So there's an overall budget, and then it starts to break down into the little different compartments, whether it's group, area, region, store, within a store. They all have to try to make money. But what would happen is those executives trying to hold on to their bonuses cut the fat on the bottom faster and then want you to continue to sell that. And that's a challenge because I knew exactly if you're budgeting people week to week and somebody takes a 1 week vacation, so now they're not in a store scenario, you don't just operate without that person. You have to schedule somebody else to come in, or at least try to help come in during certain flows. So that was extra cost because the person getting a vacation was still getting their regular money. Now, I would factor in, all right, I know this person's coming up on vacation. I'm going to reduce hours here and here and here and here so it levels out. But not everybody thought like that. You know, that's the way I started honing all these things of awareness, anticipation, action. It was like literally I was looking at hard numbers and saying, all right, how do I not have a drop off? I don't want to get caught by surprise. If I know somebody's going on vacation, I got to bring in some extra dollars. Let me knock off some extra dollars early on. Or, you know, during rush periods back to school, we had extra money because we didn't know the full impact. During the lean part, you just had to stay the course. So you had to steal from or rob from Peter to pay Paul during the rush period when you had extra hours and extra dollars and say, all right, I'm trying to save this. Eventually what started to happen, they started creating systems that was watching that and they weren't allowing you to do that anymore. And it's like, so it was hurting. It's going to affect me if I run it smartly during the downtime. And it's like, yeah, well, we need that money for the whole group now. It just got harder and harder.
That makes me think, and we can talk about this in another episode too, and maybe you could open my eyes to this as well, but fighting for yourself financially once you do land that job. Because the recruiter would sent me a salary for my job, and I just said, okay. And then when I got the job, I started hearing people say, oh, I did some negotiating. Negotiating? What's that? You could ask for more money. You could.
Right. You don't know, especially coming out your first job. And again, once they have you, they try to keep you at that spot and just give you whatever is in the books as year-to-year raises or every 6 months, if they're still able to do that. So it's always important that first, if you say I'm going to work for $40,000, it's like, yeah, I'm going to work for $40,000. But if you wanted to negotiate, you don't want to go back in there a year and say, well, I really wanted 50. You got to go in there saying, You sure you can't do 50? And you become afraid in terms of competitiveness and how to try to get a job, that if you push too hard, they're like, all right, I'm gonna go to the next candidate who's gonna take the 40. Mm-hmm. Now you're still searching and you don't even have the 40. So you start to go, but you have to learn those things. And you look at things like, I don't know how often you look at LinkedIn. So now sometimes when you look at a job, it'll tell you what they're offering or what the range and the average. And then in some cases, they don't even show it. So they're trying to take that out of it, where they're not even supposed to ask you anymore what you made before previously. I'm curious of how that even works, because things are slotted.
Well, I've been open to recruiters and looking at other jobs, and the common question is, what are you looking for? What's the range that you're looking for? It sounds good to you.
Right, and they say it all casually because they almost they want you to be at ease, going, I want 80,000. Oh.
Ooh, okay,
well, next. You know, I like your resume, and we'll get back to you. No, we won't. Because they're not supposed to say that. But, you know, so you have to be careful. You got to be aware. You got to do your research. That's all incorporated in having a go at it, go for it attitude. Mm-hmm. And again, education kind of forces you to challenge, because you have to compete to get jobs. Mm-hmm. Everything's a competition. So you were like, oh, I was saying America's whatever number or something. I was just throwing out a number. You're like, it's not a competition.
It's a competition level, when you're fighting for your livelihood, not for America to be number one.
Well, you didn't say number one, but again, you look at where your position is and say, how do you improve it? How do you call America so great if in educational metrics, they're 44th in the world? There's not 44 nations that are better than us, but they teach their students better. I even wrote that note down and I looked for countries that give away free education until, I guess, through the first 4 years of college, through a bachelor's degree, and see where they rank. And then you may want to look at their cultures and see, you know, look for stories about them and see how their people feel. And are there mass shootings? Are there this? Are there that? They seem to be happier people because they're not just fixated in money. They want them all to partake and benefit from what their country presents. And then you know what happens if you say that in some place in America? A Republican will say, that's socialism. No, it's not mind control socialism. It's saying we want all our people to benefit, and we're going to help the ones that can't, and no one gets too big. Because is Jeff Bezos helping somebody with a cup outside of an Amazon? They're trying to make a union, I think, down in Alabama. Like Bernie Sanders and some other people are like, yes, go for it. A union at Amazon, at a retail establishment.
I would be interested for us to go more in depth into, okay, whatever education level you stop at, once you get into the job market, how do you stand out? So we'll see if our viewers want to see that as well.
Okay, that's something we could definitely look forward to. That's all I have today. How about you?
Yep.
Well, thanks for joining us. Hopefully this was informative and it gets you to make you think. And if you have any questions, you can let us know and reach out to us. But until next time, this has been Ignorance is Infinite. Thank you.
Yeah.